You ever drive down a street that feels like it's etched into your soul? The kind of place where every crack in the sidewalk, every tree branch, every mailbox tells a story about who you are? That was my street, and at the end it was my childhood home. A house that wasn't just bricks and mortar, but a living, breathing piece of me. Now imagine pulling up to that house one day, your heart full of nostalgia, only to see a sold sign glaring at you from the front lawn. Not just sold, but gone, traded away like it was nothing, to pay for someone else's dream. That's where my story begins. And let me warn you, it's a gut-wrenching ride that'll stick with you long after you hear it. My name's Ethan, and this is the story of how my parents sold my $2 million childhood home to fund my sister's wedding, and how one letter I sent turned our family into ashes. I was 25 when it all went down, living in a shoebox apartment an hour from my hometown, scraping by as a freelance graphic designer. My life wasn't glamorous. Think late nights hunched over a laptop, ramen for dinner, and a bank account that laughed at me when I checked it. But I had one thing that kept me grounded, my childhood home. It was a 2-story colonial with faded blue siding, nestled on a bluff in a sleepy California coastal town. The kind of place where the air smelled like salt and cedar, and the Pacific Ocean stretched out in front of you, like it was daring you to dream big. The house had character. Creaky hardwood floors, a wraparound porch with a swing that groaned under your weight, and windows that rattled in the winter storms. My dad used to say it was worth $2 million, maybe more, thanks to the real estate boom that had turned our quiet town into a gold mine. "This is our legacy, Ethan," he'd tell me, his voice thick with pride as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "We'll never let it go." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? That house was my anchor, the one place I could always come back to, no matter how messy life got. My family was me, my parents, and my older sister, Claire. Claire was 3 years my senior and the golden child in every sense. She had this effortless charisma, the kind that made people lean in when she spoke. Growing up, she got the bigger bedroom with the bay window, the shiny new Jeep when she turned 16, the college fund that seemed to magically refill itself. I didn't mind, not really. I loved Claire, looked up to her, even when her shadow felt a little suffocating. She was the one who could do no wrong. Straight A's, prom queen, the daughter who made my parents' eyes light up. Me? I was a quiet one. The kid who spent hours sketching the attic or sneaking out to stargaze on the roof. I didn't need the spotlight, and I was okay with that. At least, I thought I was. Things started to shift when Claire got engaged to Mark. He was a corporate lawyer. The kind of guy who wore tailored suits and flashed a Rolex like it was an extension of his personality. He had a smile that was too perfect, a laugh that never quite reached his eyes, and a way of talking that made you feel like you were being sold something. My parents were smitten. "He's perfect for Claire," my mom would gush, her hands clasped like she was living a rom-com. "They're going to have such a beautiful life." I wasn't so sure. Mark was slick, too slick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. But I kept my mouth shut. Claire was happy, my parents were thrilled, and who was I to rain on their parade? The wedding planning took over like a tidal wave. Suddenly, every conversation was about venues, catering, flowers, and Claire's vision for her perfect day. My parents were all in, throwing around numbers that made my head spin. A $250,000 wedding, they said, because Claire deserved nothing less. Waterfront venue, live band, a custom gown that cost more than my car. Nothing was too good for their princess. I'd nod along when they talked about it, but I started noticing things. My parents were stressed, their voices sharp when they thought I wasn't listening. They'd whisper about budgets, about making it work, and then change the subject when I walked into the room. "It's just wedding stuff, Ethan," my mom would say, waving me off with a tight smile. "Don't worry about it." But I was starting to worry. Something felt off, like a storm was brewing just out of sight. The wedding planning took over like a tidal wave. Suddenly, every conversation was about venues, catering, flowers, and Claire's vision for her perfect day. My parents were all in, throwing around numbers that made my head spin. A $250,000 wedding, they said, because Claire deserved nothing less. Waterfront venue, live band, a custom gown that cost more than my car. Nothing was too good for their princess. I'd nod along when they talked about it, but I started noticing things. My parents were stressed, their voices sharp when they thought I wasn't listening. They'd whisper about budgets, about making it work, and then change the subject when I walked into the room. "It's just wedding stuff, Ethan." My mom would say, waving me off with a tight smile. "Don't worry about it." But I was starting to worry. Something felt off, like a storm was brewing just out of sight. I didn't visit the house as often as I used to. Work kept me chained to my desk, and the hour-long drive wasn't exactly a joyride in my beat-up Honda. But every time I did go back, it was like stepping into a time machine. The smell of the ocean, the creak of the porch swing, the way the light filtered to the kitchen window, it was all still there, waiting for me. Those visits were my reset button, a reminder that no matter how tough things got, I had a home. Until the day I didn't. It was a Saturday in late spring, and I was fried. I'd been pulling all-nighters for a client who kept changing their mind, and my brain felt like it was running on fumes. I needed a break, needed to feel something real. So I grabbed my keys and headed for the house. The drive was a blur. My radio cranked to drown out the static in my head. As I turned onto our street, my stomach dropped. There was a sold sign, bold and red, planted in the front yard like a middle finger. I slammed on the brakes, my coffee cup tipping over and soaking the passenger seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Sold? My house? The one my dad swore was our legacy? My heart was a jackhammer in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't move. This had to be a mistake. They would have told me. They had to. I stumbled out of the car, my sneakers crunching on the gravel driveway, and banged on the front door. No answer. The windows were dark, the curtains gone. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging it up. The living room was empty, no couch, no coffee table, no family photos on the mantel. It was like someone had gutted the house, stripped it of every memory. My legs felt weak as I circled the property, checking every window, every door. The backyard was barren. The oak tree where I carved my initials standing alone like a gravestone. The swing set Claire and I used to fight over? Gone. I sank onto the porch steps, my hand shaking, my phone clutched in my lap. I called my mom, my dad, Claire, straight to voicemail, all of them. My pulse was a drum in my ears, loud and relentless. What the hell was going on? For 3 days, I was a wreck. I left voicemails, sent texts, even tried emailing my parents, nothing. The silence was a weight, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I kept replaying that sold sign in my head, the empty rooms, the way my entire childhood had been erased without a word. Finally, on the 3rd day, my mom called back. Her voice was tight, like she was forcing the words out. "Ethan, we had to sell the house," she said. "It was the only way to pay for Claire's wedding. You know how important this is to her." I froze, the phone slippery in my hand. They sold my home, our home, for a wedding? For Claire's big, shiny moment? "You didn't tell me," I said, my voice cracking. "You didn't even ask." She sighed, that exasperated sound I knew too well from my childhood, the one that meant I was being difficult. "It's done, Ethan. You need to let it go." Let it go? Like it was that simple. Like they hadn't just ripped out the one place that held every piece of me. I hung up, my hands trembling so badly I dropped the phone. The anger came next, slow at first, then all-consuming, like a fire spreading through dry grass. They didn't just sell the house. They chose Claire over me, again, in the most brutal way possible. My whole life, I've been the one to step back, to let Claire have the bigger slice of everything. The better room, the new clothes, the endless praise. But this was a betrayal I couldn't swallow. I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. I started digging. Because something about the sale didn't add up. My dad was meticulous about money, the kind of guy who'd argue over a $2 discrepancy on a receipt. He wouldn't just unload a $2 million asset without a plan. I called the real estate agent listed on the sign, a woman named Karen, who sounded like she was smiling through the phone. "Oh, you're the son?" she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "Your parents didn't mention you." That hit like a punch. But I pushed through. She told me the house sold for $1.8 million, a steal in that market. They were in a rush, she added, almost too casually. A rush for what? Claire's wedding was still 6 months away. I wasn't done. I pulled public records, scoured property listings, even charmed a clerk at the county office into giving me the buyer's name. It was a developer, a faceless corporation already filing permits to tear the house down and build a condo complex. My stomach churned at the thought of my home, my oak tree, my porch swing, reduced to dust. But the deeper I went, the uglier it got. I found a bank transfer in the sale documents. $1.5 million from the house went to an account I didn't recognize. Not my parents' joint account. Not Claire's. It was tied to Mark, Claire's fiancé. Just Mark. Not a wedding fund. Not a shared account. His personal account. My head spun. Why was the money from our family's legacy going to a guy we'd known for less than a year? I couldn't stop. I pieced together a timeline, cross-referencing dates and deposits. Mark had always been cagey about his finances, dodging questions about his job, paying for things in cash, flashing that Rolex like it was a shield. My parents had been so dazzled by him, so eager to make Claire happy. They didn't ask questions. But I did. I found a second account linked to Mark, one with transactions that didn't make sense. Large withdrawals, transfers to offshore banks. I'm no detective, but it didn't take a genius to see something was wrong. Was he scamming my family? Was he using the house money for something else? And why did my parents tell me? The betrayal was a physical thing, a knot in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sold sign, heard my mom's voice telling me to let it go. I was done being the good son, the one who stayed quiet. I needed to do something that would force them to face what they'd done. That's when I decided to write the letter. It wasn't just a letter, it was a weapon. I sat at my rickety kitchen table, a single bulb flickering overhead, and let the words pour out. I addressed it to Claire and Mark, with copies from my parents and a few relatives who'd been at the engagement party, fawning over the perfect couple. I didn't hold back. I laid out the facts. The house sold for $1.8 million. The $1.5 million transferred to Mark's account. The developer's plans to demolish our home. I asked the question that was tearing me apart. Why did the money from our family's legacy go to Mark? What was he doing with it? I didn't accuse him outright. I didn't need to. The truth was sharp enough, and I knew it would cut deep. I mailed the letters the next morning, my hand steady as I dropped them into the mailbox. There was no going back now. I just lit a fuse, and I had no idea how big the explosion would be. All I knew was that I was done carrying their secret. I was done being the one who let things go. The moment those letters hit the mailbox, it was like I'd pulled the pin on a grenade and tossed it into the heart of my family. I stood there, staring at the metal slot, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I just sent out a truth bomb. Pages of cold, hard fact about the sale of our $2 million childhood home, the shady money trail leading to my sister's fiancé, Mark, and the betrayal that had gutted me. There was no undoing it, no calling it back. I'd lit the fuse, and now all I could do was wait for the explosion. My name's Ethan, and this is the part of my story where everything starts to unravel, where the cracks in my family turn into chasms, and where I learn just how far people will go to protect their secrets. I went home to my cramped apartment, the kind of place where the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor's TV through them. The air smelled like stale coffee and regret. I sat on my sagging couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of that letter in my head. Had I been too harsh? Too reckless? The letter wasn't just a list of facts. It was a challenge, a demand for answers. I'd addressed it to Claire and Mark, with copies to my parents and a handful of relatives who'd been at the engagement party, all starry-eyed over Claire's perfect future. I'd laid it all bare. The house sold for $1.8 million, a steal in our booming coastal town. The $1.5 million funneled into Mark's personal account, not a wedding fund. The developer's plans to bulldoze our home for condos. And that question, the one that burned in my gut, why was the money from our family's legacy going to a guy we barely knew? I didn't accuse Mark of anything outright. I didn't have to. The numbers were loud enough, and I knew Claire's guilt would fill in the gaps. The first call came 2 days later, and it wasn't from my parents. It was Claire. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, her name flashing on the screen like a warning. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to keep the distance between us. But I couldn't. I needed to hear her voice, to know what she was thinking. I picked up, and before I could say a word, she was screaming, "Ethan, how could you do this to me?" Her voice was raw, a mix of tears and rage that hit me like a slap. "You're ruining my life, my wedding, everything." I stood there, gripping the phone, my jaw tight. I wanted to feel sorry for her, to see the sister I'd grown up with, the one who used to sneak me cookies when I was grounded. But all I could see was the empty shell of our house, the sold sign mocking me from the front lawn. "You ruined our home," I said, my voice low and steady. "You and Mom and Dad. You did this, not me." She let out a sob, a sound that cut deeper than her anger. And then the line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the call, Claire's words looping in my head like a broken record. Was I the bad guy here? Had I gone too far? I'd spent my whole life stepping back, letting Claire have the spotlight, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. But this time, they'd crossed the line, selling our childhood home, my anchor, my safe place, to fund her $250,000 wedding, and not even telling me. That wasn't just a betrayal. It was a theft of my history, my memories, my trust. I kept thinking about the house, the way the porch swing creaked, the way the oak tree in the backyard held my initials like a secret. It was gone now, or soon would be, replaced by some soulless condo complex. And for what? A party? A dress? A man I didn't trust? The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mom. I braced myself, expecting tears or apologies, but her voice was cold, clipped, like she was reading from a script. "Ethan, you've caused a lot of pain," she said. "You didn't need to send that letter. You could have talked to us." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "Talk to you? I tried, Mom. I called, I texted, I begged for answers. You shut me out." There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "Claire's devastated. She might call off the wedding. Is that what you want?" I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm. What I want? I wanted our home, Mom. I wanted you to care about me as much as you care about her. She didn't respond to that, just sighed and said, "We'll talk later," before hanging up. I knew we wouldn't. Not really. The days that followed were a blur of silence and tension. My dad didn't call, didn't show up, didn't even text. That hurt more than I expected. He'd always been the steady one, the one who'd sit with me on the porch and talk about life, about how the house was our legacy. Now he was a ghost, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost him for good. I tried to focus on work, but my clients' emails went unanswered, my sketches half-finished. All I could think about was the letter, the money, Mark. What was he doing with $1.5 million? Why had my parents trusted him with it? The questions gnawed at me, relentless, until I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to keep digging. I started with Mark's background. I'm no hacker, but the internet's a gold mine if you know where to look. I pulled up his LinkedIn, his law firm's website, even some old social media posts Claire had tagged him in. On the surface, he was Mr. Perfect, Ivy League degree, rising star at prestigious firm, charming smile in every photo. But there were gaps, things that didn't add up. His job history was vague, with consulting gigs that didn't list clients. His social media was polished but sparse, like he was curating an image. I dug deeper, searching public records, business filings, anything I could find. That's when I stumbled on a lawsuit from 3 years back, buried in a legal database. Mark had been named in a case involving financial misconduct at a previous firm. The details were sealed, but the plaintiff claimed he'd mismanaged funds. The case was settled out of court, and Mark walked away unscathed. My stomach twisted. This wasn't proof of anything, but it was a red flag, one my parents had clearly ignored. I kept going, pulling bank records I'd accessed through the house sale documents. The $1.5 million transfer to Mark's account was just the start. There were other transactions, large withdrawals, transfers to offshore accounts, payments to companies I couldn't trace. I was an accountant, but it looked like money laundering or at least something shady. I started to wonder if Claire knew. She'd always been blind to Mark's flaws, dazzled by his charm and his promises of a perfect life. Had she signed off on this? Or was she a victim? 2. The thought made me sick. I wanted to believe she was innocent, that she hadn't sold out our family for a fairy tale wedding. But doubt crept in and it wouldn't let go. I decided to confront her, not over phone but face to face. I drove to her apartment, a sleek high-rise in the city where she and Mark lived. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel, my heart racing as I rehearsed what I'd say. I didn't want to fight. I wanted answers. I buzzed her apartment, half expecting her to ignore me, but the door clicked open. She was waiting in the hallway, her arms crossed, her eyes red and puffy. "What do you want, Ethan?" she said, her voice flat. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "I want to know why you let this happen. Why you let them sell our house for your wedding. Why the money went to Mark." Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she'd cry. But then she straightened, her jaw tight. "You don't understand," she said. "You've never understood what it's like to want something so bad you'd do anything for it." I stared at her, my chest tight. "You wanted a wedding that bad? Bad enough to erase our home." She looked away, her hands twisting together. "It wasn't just a wedding," she said. So, quietly I almost missed it. Mark needed the money. He said it was for us, for our future. My blood ran cold. Needed it for what? I pressed. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know, okay? I trusted him. Mom and Dad trusted him. You're the only one who didn't." I wanted to grab her, shake her, make her see what she'd done. But I just stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't know. She was in too deep, blinded by love or denial or both. I left her apartment without another word, my mind racing. If Claire didn't know what Mark was doing, then my parents had to. They'd signed the papers, made the transfer, kept me in the dark. I drove home, the city lights blurring through my windshield, and made a decision. I wasn't done with the truth. I'd sent a letter to expose the sale, but now I needed to know the whole story, every ugly detail. I started calling relatives, the ones who'd gotten copies of the letter, my aunt, my cousins, anyone who might have heard something. Most of them were cagey, dodging my questions, but my cousin Jen was different. She'd always been the blunt one, the one who didn't buy into Claire's perfect image. "I heard your parents talking at the engagement party," she told me over the phone. "They were worried about Mark's business ventures. Said he needed a big investment to secure Claire's future. I thought it was weird, but I didn't push. An investment? That's what they called selling our home?" I thanked Jen and hung up, my head spinning. Mark wasn't just shady. He was playing my family, and they'd handed him the keys to our legacy. I started researching his business ventures, digging into shell companies and obscure filings. It was like peeling an onion, each layer more rotten than the last. I found a company registered in Mark's name, one that listed real estate development as its purpose. My heart stopped. Was he working with the developer who bought our house? Was this all part of some bigger scheme? The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. My parents had chosen Mark, a man they barely knew, over me, their own son. They'd sold our home, our history, without a word, and now I was the one picking up the pieces. I couldn't let it go, not yet. I started drafting another letter, this one to the developer who bought the house. I wanted to know if Mark was involved, if he'd orchestrated the sale from the start. I didn't send it, not yet. I needed more proof, something concrete. But the idea of it, the possibility of blowing this wide open, kept me going. By now, the family was fracturing. Claire stopped answering my texts, and my parents went radio silent. I heard through Jen that Claire and Mark were fighting, that the wedding might be off. Part of me felt guilty, like I'd pushed too hard, broken something that couldn't be fixed. But then I'd think of the house, the way it looked that day, Empty, abandoned, betrayed, and the guilt would burn away. I wasn't the villain here. I was the one fighting for what was mine, for the truth my family had buried. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by notes and bank records, I realized something. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about me, about refusing to be the one who always got left behind. I'd sent that first letter to shake things up, but now I was in too deep to stop. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it no matter what it cost. I didn't know it then, but I was about to uncover something that would make the first betrayal look like child's play. The real storm was coming, and it was going to tear us all apart. The air in my apartment felt heavy, like the walls were closing in. I was surrounded by scraps of paper, bank statements, property records, notes scribbled in the middle of the night, each one a piece of the puzzle that had become my obsession. My childhood home, the $2 million anchor of my life, was gone, sold to fund my sister Claire's extravagant wedding. The money, or most of it, had vanished into an account belonging to her fiancé, Mark, a man whose charm hid something darker. I'd sent a letter exposing the truth, and it had cracked my family wide open. Now, as the fallout spread like wildfire, I was digging deeper, chasing a truth that felt more dangerous with every step. My name's Ethan, and this is the final chapter of my story. The part where the secrets come to light, the wedding crumbles, and I learned what it really costs to stand up for yourself. The days after my confrontation with Claire were a blur of silence and dread. My phone, once buzzing with notifications, sat quiet on my kitchen counter. No calls from my parents, no text from Claire, just the hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of city traffic. I'd pushed too hard. I knew that. The letter I'd sent, detailing the house sale, the $1.5 million transfer to Mark's account, the developer's plans to demolish our home, had done its job. It had shaken them, forced them to face what they'd done. But it had also left me alone, stranded in the wreckage of a family I thought I knew. I kept asking myself if it was worth it. The house was gone. My relationships were in tatters. And the truth I'd uncovered was only half the story. I couldn't stop, though. Not now. I needed to know everything, even if it destroyed what little was left. I went back to the records I'd been compiling, the ones that painted a picture of Mark's shady dealings. The $1.5 million from the house sale wasn't the only red flag. There were other transactions, large withdrawals, transfers to offshore accounts, payments to companies with vague names like Coastal Ventures and Pacific Holdings. I'd found a lawsuit from years back, buried in a legal database, where Mark had been accused of financial misconduct at a previous firm. The case was settled quietly, but it was enough to make me question everything. Was he a con artist? A crook? Or just a guy in over his head? And how had my parents, who'd always been so careful with money, fallen for him? I decided to focus on the developer who'd bought the house. If I could prove Mark was connected to them, it might explain why the sale happened so fast, why the money went to him. I pulled up the developer's website, a glossy page full of buzzwords like luxury living and coastal elegance. They were already advertising the condo complex that would replace my home, complete with renderings of sleek glass towers that looked nothing like the house I loved. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the images, imagining my oak tree bulldoze, my porch swing tossed in a dumpster. I found the company's contact info and drafted an email, posing as a curious buyer. I asked about the project timeline, the land acquisition, anything that might give me a clue. The response came a day later, polite but vague. The property was acquired through a private sale. Construction is set to begin next quarter. No mention of Mark, but something about the phrase private sale stuck with me. It felt deliberate, like they were hiding something. I wasn't ready to give up. I called the county records office, sweet-talking the same clerk who'd helped me before. She was hesitant, but eventually pulled the full sale agreement. Buried in the fine print was a name I hadn't seen before, a real estate broker who'd facilitated the deal. A quick Google search revealed he worked for a firm linked to one of Mark's consulting gigs from his LinkedIn profile. My heart raced. This wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. Mark wasn't just a bystander. He'd been involved in the sale, maybe even orchestrated it. I started to wonder if the wedding was just a cover, a way to justify the money grab. The thought made me sick, but it also fueled me. I was getting closer to the truth, and I wasn't backing down. While I dug, the family drama was escalating. My cousin Jen, the only one still talking to me, texted me updates. Claire and Mark were barely speaking. She said, "The wedding, once the center of everyone's world, was on shaky ground." "Claire's a mess," Jen wrote. "She keeps saying she didn't know about the money, but nobody believes her." I didn't know what to believe either. I'd seen the look in Claire's eyes when I confronted her at her apartment. The fear, the guilt. She'd said Mark needed the money for their future, but she didn't know the details. Was she lying to protect him? Or had she been played too? I wanted to reach out, to ask her directly, but the memory of her accusing me of ruining her life stopped me. She'd chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. Then my dad showed up. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and I was knee-deep in research when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there, his coat soaked, his face gray and lined. He looked like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, stepping aside, my heart in my throat. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, he spoke. "You've torn this family apart, Ethan," he said, his eyes fixed on the table. "That letter, you didn't have to do that." I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. "You tore it apart." I shot back. "You sold our home, Dad. You gave the money to Mark without telling me." "Why?" He flinched like I'd struck him, but he didn't answer. Instead, he rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said finally, "for Claire, for her future." I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What about my future? Did that ever cross your mind?" He looked at me then, his eyes wet, and for a moment, I saw the dad I used to know, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd sat with me on the porch and promised the house was ours forever. But then he stood, his shoulders slumped, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again, the weight of his words settling over me like ash. They thought they were doing the right thing. For Claire. Always for Claire. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying my dad's face, the way he dodged my question. He knew more than he was saying, and I was done with half answers. I went back to the records, focusing on the offshore accounts I'd found in Mark's transactions. I wasn't an expert, but I knew enough to recognize a pattern. The money was moving fast, bouncing between accounts in places like the Caymans and Panama. I started researching money laundering, fraud, anything that might explain what I was seeing. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. I found a forum where people discussed shell companies like the ones Mark was tied to, fronts for hiding money, dodging taxes, or worse. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I was starting to see the bigger picture. Mark wasn't just a shady lawyer. He was playing a game, and my family was his pawn. I decided to take a risk. I contacted a private investigator, a guy I found through a freelance client who'd used him for a business dispute. His name was Tom, a gruff ex-cop with no-nonsense vibe. I sent him everything I had, bank records, the lawsuit, the developer's info, and asked him to dig into Mark's finances. It wasn't cheap, eating up most of my savings, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them on my own. Tom called me a week later, his voice grim. "Your boy's in deep," he said. "Those accounts you flagged? They're tied to a network of companies, most of them fronts. He's moving money for someone or something big. And that developer? They're not clean either. I found payments from them to one of Mark's shell companies, dated a month before the house sale. My blood ran cold. Mark wasn't just involved, he was neck deep, and the house was part of the scheme. Tom's findings were a bombshell, but they also left me with more questions. Why had my parents gone along with this? Had Mark manipulated them, or were they complicit? I thought about confronting them again, but I knew it was pointless. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. Instead, I focused on Claire. If the wedding was falling apart, maybe she was ready to talk, to tell me what she knew. I drove to her apartment again, my hands shaky on the wheel. This time, she didn't let me in. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face pale. Go away, Ethan, she said, her voice flat. I can't do this. I took a step closer, desperate. Claire, I know about Mark. The money, the companies, all of it. You need to get out before it's too late. Her eyes widened, just for a second, but then she shut down. You're wrong, she said, slamming the door in my face. I stood there, rain soaking my jacket, feeling like I'd lost it for good. But as I walked back to my car, something shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. Mark was the key, and I was going to bring him down. I went back to Tom, asking him to keep digging, to find something I could use. He warned me it could get dangerous, that people like Mark didn't play nice when cornered. I didn't care. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about justice, about making sure no one else got hurt. Weeks passed, and the wedding date came and went. Jen texted me the news. Claire had called it off. Mark had moved out, and Claire would stay with a friend. I felt a pang of relief, but it was short-lived. Tom called me the next day with a bombshell. He'd found evidence that Mark was working with a syndicate, a group known for real estate scams. The house sale was part of a larger deal, one that involved flipping properties for profit and hiding the money offshore. Mark had used my parents' trust to get the house at a discount, then funneled the profits to his bosses. The developer was in on it, too. Tom had already tipped off the authorities, and an investigation was underway. When the news broke, it was like a bomb going off. Mark's law firm fired him, citing ethical violations. He disappeared, leaving Claire to pick up the pieces. My parents were questioned by the police, but they claimed they didn't know the full extent of Mark's scheme. I didn't believe them, not entirely. They'd been too eager to please him, too quick to hand over our legacy. They moved into a rented condo, a sterile box that felt like a downgrade in every way. Claire started therapy, or so Jen said. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. The hurt was too deep, the trust too broken. Looking back, I wonder if I could have done things differently. Maybe I could have talked to Claire before sending the letter, given my parents a chance to explain. But every time I think that, I see the empty rooms of our house, the sold sign, the way my family chose Mark over me. That letter wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about standing up for myself, about refusing to be the one who always got pushed aside. It cost me everything, my family, my home, my sense of belonging. But it gave me something too, clarity. I saw my family for who they were, not who I wanted them to be. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you're fighting for scraps of your family's love, like you're invisible next to someone else's spotlight, I get it. It's okay to fight back, to demand what's yours, even if it means breaking something that can't be fixed. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to burn it all down and start again. My story isn't a happy one, but it's mine and I'm owning it. Thanks for listening. It means more than you know.